by the Jamaican organizing side and a team chosen by the visiting delegation. I was not part of the Jamaican team negotiating the visit. I made no official statements on the matter, but responded to questions on my personal Facebook page. During a briefing providing the details of the trips, we were told that the Japanese team had stated that there would be no opportunity given for the Jamaican media to ask questions of Prime Minister Abe. Representations by the Jamaican side for at least one question were denied. On Wednesday afternoon, just before the signing ceremony at the OPM, I met with members of the Japanese delegation and appealed to them to allow our local media access. This request was politely denied. I now turn to the visit of the UK Prime Minister. First, his delegation agreed to one question from the media. However, for reasons unknown to me, this was changed to no questions. When this was communicated to me, I expressed my dissatisfaction to Foreign Affairs, and then I called the British High Commissioner to appeal for consideration for the Jamaican media. This call took place on Tuesday afternoon, shortly after 1 o'clock. I told the High Commissioner that it was not appropriate for the visit to happen without any interaction with our Jamaican media. I also told him that if a full-blown media event could not be accommodated, at the very least, one media house should be allowed to interview the Prime Minister. I was told by Foreign Affairs and JIS the following morning that interviews would be facilitated for 3 media houses right after the wreath-laying ceremony at the National Heroes Circle. You can imagine my shock when I heard that the British High Commissioner to Jamaica had said that at a press briefing that barring the media from asking questions of the Prime Minister was not their doing. A subsequent statement from the British High Commission has now established that I had spoken the truth on my Facebook page. While I'm satisfied that the High Commissioner has set the record straight, there are issues that I am compelled to address today. My integrity was brought into disrepute by erroneous statements, including by members of the media who were harsh in their commentary, labeling me a liar or facilitating others who made that claim. It is a well-established principle of responsible journalism that news reports or assertions subsequently found to be incorrect must be promptly and appropriately corrected by the publication or broadcast media concerned. This duty should not be fulfilled in a passing or perfunctory manner. The correction should be done as comprehensively and as prominently. I acknowledge those who have already set the record straight. It is important to note that with the exception of Milton Walker of TVJ and Gary Spalding of The Gleaner, to who I spoke, not one journalist or commentator sought comments from me or the OPM. Whenever I speak to you or anyone else, I speak the truth. As a former journalist myself, I respect you and the profession too much to mislead you. It troubles me that sections of the media cross the line of what is accepted as fair, honest, and responsible reporting. They chose instead to impugn my integrity through vitriolic commentary. I fully appreciate that the position I occupy as a public servant is not one immune to criticism. I can only appeal to you to be responsible and fair as you conduct your work to get information and to give information and educate the people. Get the facts and double-check them before you broadcast or print. Jamaicans, unlike many people around the world, have the good fortune of living in a democratic state with a proud tradition of free speech and zealously guarded freedom of the press. As minister, I fully subscribe to and will vigorously defend those principles. The media, in how it conducts itself, can either undermine or enhance this democratic tradition. You do not have any rights to destroy, propagate falsehood, malign, damage reputations, and tear down. You enjoy awesome freedoms, but with that freedom is an accompanying responsibility. One does not exist without the other. I hope that lessons have been learned, and I remind all that personal attacks have no place in responsible journalism. Thank you. And as the main item today that I just wanted to clear the air because I felt it was important as someone who practiced journalism for many, many years, I felt that it was important for me to put that on record. Now for the main item, the issues surrounding the non-binding MOU between Jamaica and the United Kingdom on the modernization of the country's correctional facilities to be facilitated under a proposed prisoner transfer agreement continue to occupy both traditional and new media space. Yesterday in Parliament, the National Security Minister, the Honorable Peter Bunting, gave a full response in which, among other things, he made the point that communication from the UK government on the matter could have given the mistaken impression that an agreement had been signed. Today we want you to ask all the questions and for the Minister and his team to clear any misconceptions and to ensure that the public have the full information on this matter. I now turn over to Minister. Minister?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Minister Faulkner. Good morning, everyone. This morning what I propose to do is not to give a long opening statement, as I am sure you all have copies of the statement that I made yesterday in Parliament, but perhaps just to once again highlight a few points. The motivation for this initiative is primarily to modernize our correctional facilities. We have been working hard at this for the last 3.5 years. We've made some tangible progress. We have rehabilitated South Camp Correctional Center to make it appropriate to house our juvenile girls. We have reduced the population of our female juveniles through diversion arrangements. They were close to 100 when we took office, and it's now about 30-odd, 40 in that region. We have completely separated juveniles from adults in the correctional institutions. We have signed a contract to build a new dormitory block at Tamarin Farm medium security facility, which will allow next year on completion another 300 inmates from the maximum security facilities to be transferred there and reduce the overcrowding in those facilities. We have had to condemn and evacuate one of the blocks at St. Catherine District Adult Correctional Center based on advice from the National Works Agency. And while that may be the worst block, most of the plant is in similar conditions. We are very anxious to be able to completely move out of those facilities because, as I said yesterday, God forbid we should have an earthquake, a serious earthquake in Jamaica. We will be having, or we may very well be having, a very different discussion in the public space. The issue of assistance from the British to build a new prison and also to facilitate the transfer of Jamaicans being held in British prisons to complete their term here has been going on for a long time, including with the JLP administration between 2007 and 2011. And in fact, I'm going to quote you from the former Minister of National Security this morning to expose the level of hypocrisy that they're demonstrating around this issue. But the fact is, for over 20 years, successive administrations have recognized the urgency of replacing the two slavery era facilities. And with the best intentions, prior to this, we have made no tangible progress in that regard. The capital cost is prohibitive. And of course, it's always competing with other urgent demands in health, education, infrastructure, etc. And perhaps that is why we have not been able to do anything material so far. So our motivation to pursue this, if we could have funded this from our own budget, we would have done that and there would be no argument. But our motivation, notwithstanding fiscal constraints, we feel that it is imperative that our own Jamaicans here, those almost 3,000 Jamaicans in Jamaica serving time in those two facilities, most of whom, by the way, are not hardened criminals. I think the figure was 60% of the admissions are for persons who have been sentenced to between 3 months and 3 years. That's not hardened criminals when you're looking at those sentences. Those persons may become hardened and bitter by the time they've completed their sentences in the conditions that we hold them under. I recall the first time I visited Tower Street Correctional Center, or GP, General Penitentiary, as it's still referred to by many, and I saw a cell, a 5x9 cell, with 3 adult males who had to spend 19 hours per day locked down in that cell with no ventilation apart from the grill door and a slop bucket as their only sanitary facility. And I was struck that so many years after our independence, this is still the conditions for those persons for whom we have responsibility as the state to be maintaining them in these conditions. So that has been our motivation. The deal that was put on the table, or that was the request that was made of us to consider a prisoner transfer agreement, initially had no concrete commitment of financing. There was a vague reference to technical assistance and, perhaps some financial assistance. And we said, well, we wouldn't be able to even start the process of going down the road towards a prisoner transfer agreement unless something significant was put on the table. We feel £30.5 million is significant, and we have agreed to commence a process based on that conditional offer that we would seek to engage Parliament and engage the public around the issue. If there is broad agreement on it, then Parliament will pass framework legislation. If that happens, then a prisoner transfer agreement can be negotiated. As we are today, there is no legal framework. There is no basis on which to incarcerate somebody in Jamaica to serve a sentence that was given to them in another court outside Jamaica. So there is no basis for a prisoner transfer agreement at this time with the UK or any other country. So we are really at the beginning of our process. There is nothing certain about it, but we believe that this is one way, and perhaps the only way in the medium term, that we will be able to correct what is a situation that's offensive to the dignity and human rights of our own people that we have incarcerated now. And that has been a motivation for us to pursue this initiative. But I just, the theatrics and the objections that were raised in Parliament yesterday are really quite hypocritical. I just want to quote from an Observer article of 2013 where they were covering, in fact, let me just bring up the article. The article spoke to Cameron wanting to build jails to repatriate foreign inmates, UK prison plan. And the journalist interviewed former National Security Minister Dwight Nelson, and here is what they reported then. In quotations, "I had discussions with them to work out a quid pro quo where they would finance the facility and we see how best it could accommodate the 800 prisoners they wanted to have returned," end quote, he said. However, following the discussions with 2 British cabinet ministers, Nelson said the plan was shelved as the UK experienced its share of financial constraints caused by the recession. Between 2010 and 2011, Nelson said, another proposal was placed on the table, this time by both a private British and Jamaican company, but that too was shelved due to the inability of the Jamaican government to make any financial contribution. Mr. Delroy Chuck, opposition spokesman on justice, started to describe what he thought was a preferential arrangement yesterday in Parliament, and he elaborated on it on a morning talk show program, where he said their preference was for, and they were having discussions with a US corporation, a private corporation, to build prisons in Jamaica to repatriate not just UK prisoners, but also USA prisoners. Jamaicans being held not just in the UK, but in US prisons as well, and now we're talking much larger numbers. And that even in opposition in 2012, he was still promoting this idea. So there is no principled basis on which to oppose this idea by the opposition. It is just pure, vulgar political hypocrisy and opportunism. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We now open the floor for your questions. Althea? A microphone is right behind you.
Morning. Minister Althea Saunders from the Jamaica Observer. I'm just seeking a bit of clarity here. 2 months ago, the Observer carried a story in which you had said that plans were being made to build a new prison and that it would cost approximately $10 billion in the long run to construct this prison. At the time, we were told that no such plans were being made, that there were no immediate plans.
Let me address that. The story said that I had made an announcement of a new prison. Mm-hmm. And I clarified that at the press briefing to speak to the 304-bed new dormitory block at Tamarind Farm, I was asked whether we were going to rehabilitate Tower Street and Spanish Town. In response to the question, I said it would not make any sense, given the condition and the age of those facilities, to attempt any significant rehabilitation. What we needed was a new prison. However, a new prison would cost about $10 billion. And that was then and is today a back of the envelope calculation. It could come out, depending on the specific design, more or less than that. But it would not have made sense for us to engage engineers, architects, quantity surveyors at great expense to do this detailed pricing if you had no prospect of likely funding. So I was clarifying then that I did not announce 2 months ago a new prison. I said what we need is a new prison. But the announcement I was making then was of the new prison block, the new dormitory block at Tamarind Farm Prison. And I issued something clarifying.
Okay, so the timeline that you gave at the time, about 3 to 5 years, what was that in reference to?
That in order to build a new prison block, a new prison, the shortest time frame possible, given the financing, given the construction time, the detailed design, etc., would be the earliest you could look at is 3 to 5 years. And 5 years more realistically than 3.
Well, perhaps enough clarity was not given at that briefing, because that was not my interpretation of what was said. But I will move on.
Well, I'm sorry, maybe it wasn't, but remember, it wasn't about that. The briefing wasn't about that, so I would not have come prepared to speak in detail about a new prison.
Alfeo, let's go to Loop, and then we come back to you if you have another. Carol Walker from Loop, and then we take Gary Spalding.
Yeah, good morning. Minister, that two-part question. One, I'd like to know your personal view on reparations, this reparations issue that's swirling around. Two, if and when this prisoner transfer deal is inked, what, suppose some of these prisoners are females, how do we now deal with those prisoners?
Okay, I would remind you of what I said yesterday. And I was speaking for the administration's position as well as my own. I said this matter of reparations runs deep in the Jamaican psyche, and this administration and this parliament rather has joined the call for reparatory justice. We support and indeed are a party to the decision by CARICOM to use the 10-point action plan as a basis for negotiations on the issue. That is the administration's position, and that is my personal position. And sorry, the second question? Well, they would not be accommodated. They could not be accommodated by this agreement because the prison that is, the new prison that is contemplated here would be all male. No, what I'm saying, this would not accommodate female prisoners if a prisoner transfer agreement. Remember, one of the reasons why the British have stated that a prisoner transfer agreement with Jamaica couldn't go forward was because the conditions in our prison was such that they, under their European human rights conventions, they would be deemed to be breaching the human rights of a prisoner to send them to serve their sentence in one of our prisons.
Gary Spalding.
Minister, you described the posturing of the opposition as hypocritical at best. What do you make of the more extreme position of a walkout in the aftermath of your presentation or during your presentation? And secondly, the opposition spokesman on justice suggested that you could use funds from the National Housing Trust to finance the construction of a prison. What's your take?
You know, this is why I tell you that the opposition really has no principled position, because they're all over the place in terms of this issue. You're referring to the interview this morning on the radio when the opposition was pressed, the opposition spokesman on justice was pressed to respond to the statement that I made that they had no solution to this issue. He then suggested that the new prison could be funded by the NHT or the NIF. I will leave it to the media to respond. Sorry? Well, let me just say that I think that the financing that we're looking at would be certainly preferable to asking either the NHT or the NIF to do this, particularly since the opposition has raised the issue that they think that the NHT's viability is threatened because of the funds that have been transferred to central government to support the economic reform program under the IMF agreement. And then, completely inconsistent with that position, they want to take some more funds from the NHT to build a prison. So, you know, you can see those inconsistencies and stuff. The walkout, as I said, that's political theater, you know, and, you know, I won't dignify it with a response.
Good morning, Minister. Kayla Wright from Newstalk 93 FM. In follow-up to one of the questions asked earlier, callers to our station this morning were concerned that if this deal is signed, what consideration will be given to visitors and family members of the prisoners who will be sent here? How will visits be facilitated and such?
Well, the statement I made in Parliament said that we would have to look on each case to determine which prisoners we would take. Persons like to use the example of somebody who went to the UK as a child and at age 30 or 40 committed a crime and is subsequently deported to Jamaica. There are cases like that, but I believe that is really the small minority of cases. Most of the cases that we see are persons who went to the UK as adults, sometimes are there illegally. They went as visitors on a basis of a visitor's visa and overstayed and got involved in various criminal offenses, primarily drug-related or violence-related. Somebody who went there as a child and who even went there as an adult but has a family over there, as we understand it, they would have a basis for remaining even after their sentence, because there's a right to family life that's guaranteed under the European Human Rights Convention. So they would have a course of action in the UK courts. And we would certainly, in terms of when we come to negotiating, if and when we come to negotiating the prisoner transfer agreement, we would want to make it clear that that type of prisoner who went as a child and have family in the UK, we would not be interested in them being included under this agreement. But for the Jamaicans who went there as adults, committed an offense, and their family is in Jamaica, then it would make it much more accessible for them to be in Jamaica and have access to their families have access to them. And one of the design features in the proposed or the outline design for the new prison is to have a welfare center, I think it's called, which would facilitate family visits with inmates. Right now we do facilitate that, but we have limited capacity in terms of facilitating visits, and it as a result, it's more limited than ideally we would like. So these types of facilities will be significantly expanded and enhanced in a new prison.
Okay. You've sought to make the clarification that no deal has been signed. This is despite reports from UK media and...
No, I said that we have not signed a prisoner transfer agreement. We signed an MOU, which basically says we agree a framework to see if we can work towards that. It may or may not occur. As I said, the key element is whether Parliament will pass framework legislation. And I have outlined that we'll have a special select committee which will meet, which will get submissions from technical people, from human rights people, from the diaspora, from civil society groups. We will hear the issue thoroughly, and then that special select committee will make a report advising Parliament on how to proceed.
Okay, so based on that, are we then to take it that the announcement that was made by the British Prime Minister was premature and without full basis for discussions?
I don't want to characterize it in any particular way beyond what I said in my statement, but I think it may have given the public the perception that we're further along in the process than we actually are.
Thank you, Caleb. Abko, you have a question?
Morning, Abka Fitzhenley, Nationwide News. Question to the Security Minister. The tone and tenor of the questions put to you in Parliament yesterday by the parliamentary opposition, I detected some sort of impression on that side that something a bit more final than you have conveyed has been signed. So therefore I ask you, on what basis have you described the MOU signed as non-binding?
Because there's nothing in the MOU that could facilitate a prisoner being transferred. No. It recognizes that a law would have to be passed in Parliament. A minister cannot bind Parliament. So until and unless such a law is passed, we can't proceed any further on this. So that's quite simple.
Okay. Have you secured a commitment, and by you I mean GOG, secured a commitment from the High Commission or David Cameron's office to correct the misperception entered into the public domain that this thing has been finalized?
As I said in my statement, I brought it to the attention of the High Commission, and I expect that they will deal with it appropriately.
You stated in your presentation to Parliament yesterday that this prisoner transfer deal, if signed, will not be a burden to the public's purse. Can you expand for me on the basis on which you made that statement?
Well, it is something that we're going to negotiate, and we are not going to sign something which at the end of the day would represent a net transfer of financial responsibility from the UK to Jamaica. We would recognize that there may be some quid pro quo for the money that we get, and there is a big difference between what it costs to keep a prisoner per year in Jamaica and in the UK. So there can be a win-win situation in this, because it costs about £6,000 approximately per year to keep a prisoner in a Jamaican facility versus £25,000 in a UK facility. So in that range, there is, sufficient scope for there to be a win-win. And these are the sorts of things that we will treat with if and when we get to negotiating the prisoner transfer agreement itself.
Thank you.
Thanks. Alfio, just let me check if there's anybody who hasn't had an opportunity. Nika Lewis from CVM, and we'll come back to you, and Lambert Brown from New Stock. Nika, you first.
Okay, this one is just for clarification purposes, Mr. Minister. Nika Lewis from CVM News. As it relates to the agreement, you mentioned that the PTA has not been signed off on based on legislative procedures, etc. does it mean that you'd not be able to get the money unless you sign this deal?
That's absolutely correct. It's a conditional offer. It's not a, I believe there was a headline that said something about prison gift. I would not have characterized it that way. It's not a gift. In any event, it's not a gift. They have a problem. We have what is in our context probably a bigger problem that we want to solve. And therefore, there is a negotiation around that. They have been very clear all along that outside of sort of general technical assistance that they've given to us in terms of managing a prison estate, that this substantial contribution towards the building of the new prison and the rehabilitation and reintegration is conditional upon us passing legislation, successfully negotiating a prisoner transfer agreement, and then making it operational. So they would not start giving us funds until all these things would be lined up.
All right, just a quick follow-up to that, sir. As it relates to Britain's interest in sending these prisoners back to Jamaica, I mean, if you're going to give us the money, you could just give us the money, but then you are giving us the money under the condition that we accept these prisoners and
That's
we make
why I'm
certain
saying
changes.
it's not a gift.
So, understood, it's not a gift
Yes.
at all. But I'm concerned, as a citizen of Jamaica, what this would mean for us as Jamaicans. You say outside of tax paying and all of that, it wouldn't have much implications financially on each of us as Jamaicans. But what other security implications would there be?
Well,
What if there's a prison break?
one of the that's a prison break is a security risk we manage now anyway. But again, in a new prison with the latest in security features, CCTV, for example, cell phone blockers embedded in the walls, or cell phone blocking material embedded in the walls of the cells, motion sensors on the perimeter walls and in the passageways, things like that would make it a more secure facility anyway. So that risk would be reduced, not just for whoever was transferred from the UK, but also for all our prisoners in the facility. I should also remind you that this would only apply to Jamaicans who would have been subject to deportation at the end of their sentences anyway. We have hundreds of persons, Jamaicans, who are deported every single year, and in fact, thousands over the last 10 or 20 years. I think going back at least to the 90s, we've been having, in fact, somebody just brought to my attention this morning that in the US, they're going to have an early release of 6,000 prisoners, and they're being transferred into the custody of ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which tells you right away that those are all foreign nationals in those prisons, and they're going to be deported. So if we put it this way, one way or the other, they're determined to return those nationals to the countries, from which they originated. And if they don't have an agreement, they're coming anyway. And in fact, we're seeing where in the US they do this early release of 6,000 prisoners. I can't speak to how many of them are Jamaicans, but that's a way of taking the financial burden off of them, off of their prison system, and returning those citizens back to the countries, repatriating those citizens to the countries they came from.
Lambert Brown, then we take Nadine McLeod from TVG.
Lambert Brown, the evening edition. Minister, I just asked you to comment on two issues. On September 15, 2009, the Gleaner carried the story. The minister blames deportees for rising crime situation in Jamaica. He cited, that's Minister Dwight Nelson, that particularly the UK is deporting an average of 50 every month back to Jamaica. do you make a link between deportees who are not rehabilitated properly and the increase in crime? And the second thing I want, having said that in 2009, Minister Nelson said the following, as quoted in the Observer of November 9, 2010. He said, I want to make the point that the vast majority of deportees come from the United States, not Great Britain. And yet it is Great Britain that is spending over $400 million to assist us in ensuring the proper rehabilitation of these deportees into the Jamaican society. And then the article ends as follows. So I think a basis exists for discussion between the government of the UK and our government as to what they have in mind in terms of cutting their costs by way of sending prisoners home to Jamaica. We are prepared to sit down with the British government and have discussions. Could you comment on those historic views of your predecessor, one of your predecessors?
Well, I think I'm not sure. I saw you came in a bit late. I don't know if you were here when I made the comments. Again, from another article, quoting Dwight Nelson, and where he confirmed that they were far down the road in negotiating some agreement which would have been not for 300 but for 800 at the time, and that the reason it didn't go forward was not because of the Jamaican side but because of constraints in financing on the UK side. And the other quote you gave there, I think, further supports the fact that the JLP administration was not only open to the idea, had no principled opposition to it, but were actively pursuing it themselves. Was there a second part to your question? About the contribute, right. There has, there is some correlation between the period during which we have been receiving thousands of deportees from primarily the USA and the rise in our violent crime rate. And I think it is reasonable to extrapolate from that many of those who have come home have not been reintegrated as productive citizens, and many of them have continued their lives of crime and contributed to our crime rate in Jamaica being increased. I think it points to a broader issue, though, and that is that if you just put people in prison and you don't perhaps address some of the issues regarding socialization, regarding employability, regarding creating links or maintaining links with family and some sort of supportive structure to reintegrate them into communities and society more broadly, then you really run the risk of setting up a revolving door. And the truth is that General Penitentiary or Tower Street Correctional Center and St. Catherine have been, to a great extent, revolving doors. Depending on how you measure the rate of recidivism, which is when persons reoffend after having been convicted, I think it fluctuates between the high 20s and almost 50%. Commissioner, you can give me those numbers.
When we look at reentry, it's about 29%. But when we take in consideration those who would have gotten non-custodial sentences and then move on to incarceration, that's about 48%. So
just for those persons who have already been institutionalized in a correctional facility and come back in for a second term, that's 29%. And for persons who have been convicted but not necessarily given a custodial sentence, if we include those persons as well, then it's almost 1 in 2 that ends up back in a correctional facility. So I think that further underlines the critical importance for us to pay attention to rehabilitation and the successful reintegration of our inmates back into society.
Nadine McLeod from
Yes,
TVJ.
Nadine McLeod, TVJ News. Minister, on the issue of rehabilitation, you mentioned earlier that you're targeting persons sentenced between 3 months and 3 years. What happens after they're released? We already have an issue with deportees. You also said that you are looking at persons who have families in Jamaica. Suppose the families say that they don't want them to come back and live with them.
Well, these are issues that we have regardless. For example, you may be aware, it's been in media in recent months that we have a number of mentally ill patients in the correctional system. And we don't have a choice. Once they're sent to us by the court, we have to accept them. And we've had cases where they've been assessed that they're ready and able to go back out into a family type setting, and the families refuse to take them. Or in some cases, they have been incarcerated or outside the family for so long that that family has moved on, they've migrated there. You can't find anyone who will be close enough family to take responsibility. So these are the types of challenges that the correctional system faces on an ongoing basis. Just to clarify, when I said that I'm concerned with the persons who, the 60% of the intake who really come with sentences of between 3 months and 3 years, that was to point out that certainly in the first instance that people are committed to serve custodial sentences, it's not as if they're coming for murder or rape or a serious violent offense, because you not typically get a 3-month sentence or up to a 3-year sentence for those offenses. So it shows you that they're probably coming for housebreaking, larceny, relatively minor offenses within the scheme of things. So these persons, we take a very calloused view. I mean, I have heard myself Jamaicans expressing, well, they don't care how terrible it is in prison. It should be worse, because these are wicked people who have committed murder, etc. But that's not the vast majority of our inmates.
Minister, should Jamaicans be less concerned because they're coming for housebreaking as opposed to murder?
I think somebody who is convicted of housebreaking has a reasonable chance, or a good chance, with a proper facility, of being rehabilitated, being given a skill that they can earn a living from. We have 50% of our inmates are illiterate. That is about maybe 4 times the average in the population, 4 or 5 times the average in the population, which suggests that if you are illiterate, for example, your likelihood of ending up in a correctional facility is much higher. We now have a program that we're introducing with the Ministry of Education through the Jamaica Foundation for Lifelong Learning, to greatly expand the high school equivalency courses or teaching that will be offered within our correctional system, because we recognize that these are some of the impediments that persons have to succeeding when they go back out into society.
Minister, the question I asked earlier about deportees, the possibility of them ending up on the road, you said that that's a challenge we have now.
Yes, because
they have not
every month
the solution or anything towards
that. We don't have any solution, because if now as we speak, every month, typically you would get a couple plane loads, charter flights, would bring Jamaicans back who have not committed an offense in Jamaica. They get off the plane at Norman Manley, and within our laws, they are free persons. They're not, they clear the airport and they go about their business. We have no legal framework, apart from a statute that was passed some years ago that gives you some monitoring rights. But the truth of the matter is, because there have been so many deportees who have come over the last 2 decades, I mean, we're probably, I don't know, talking 25, 30,000 persons. As a practical matter, the GSCF doesn't have the resources to be able to monitor those, volumes of people.
We are going to go back around the room and take 3 more questions. So, Alfie, I think you were first in line.
Minister, what is the timeline for wrapping up those consultations to decide whether or not we go ahead with the agreement? And can you say what your plan B is if we do not get this money from Britain?
I think we are realistically looking at another year before we could go through the parliamentary process. We would establish a joint select committee. It would have hearings. It would allow persons to make written submissions, oral submissions. We know this is a sensitive issue for the society, so we would want to allow as much participation as possible. So that will take a few months. Assuming that there is a positive outcome of that, and on balance with taking all the issues into consideration, we want to proceed, then we would have to bring a bill to the House. Now, granted, some of this work can be done in parallel, but we would we'd bring a bill to the House, which would then be debated. If that is passed through the House and Senate, then we can move to negotiate a prisoner transfer agreement, and also to finalize the design, the pricing, and the construction contracts for the new prison. Oh, what is the plan B? The plan B is that we continue at the pace that we are going now, where we, each year try and expand the capacity of the medium security facilities by building additional blocks, a couple $100 million a year in capital expenditure. And what we will be able to do after maybe 4 or 5 years is we could transfer enough prisoners to close one of the maximum security facilities. And then again, hopefully that by that time the financial position of the government would have improved sufficiently that you could start on a replacement for the remaining maximum security facility.
Damian Phillips.
Morning to you, Minister. Have you spoken with your colleague, Minister Peter Phillips, on this matter, and have you also referred to officials from the IMF with regard to the plans for this new prison, if in fact it goes ahead?
Yes, I've spoken with this matter was considered by Cabinet. This is not something that I would have proceeded on my own. So the matter was considered by Cabinet. I also have had discussions with Minister Phillips, because he occupied this portfolio, and one of the things that I know that he struggled with during his term was this whole issue of how to replace these 2 old facilities. So he is very strong on the human rights imperative. I'm sure he was disappointed that during his term, that administration wasn't able to deal with it. Interim one came, JLP administration, they entered upon the reference but were unable to succeed. And we're doing the same thing now. And of course, with every succeeding administration, the facilities get older, more dilapidated, more rundown, and therefore the urgency increases as far as I'm concerned.
Perhaps forgive me, quotes here, enslaved to the IMF strictures.
No,
yes.
To the extent you're financing it from your budget, it doesn't really present an issue for the IMF, because you're still spending within the you know, the parameters of the primary surplus targets, etc. One of the avenues we had started pursuing was the idea of a PPP, the public-private partnership, where we thought we could get a private company to build and finance, and then we pay them back over time. But under the IMF agreement, that is treated just like a loan, and therefore would have pushed us over the loan ceilings, etc., that have been negotiated. Even though it may not be a loan in the traditional sense, because the only customer for this PPP would be the government, and because therefore the entire capital expenditure would have to be recouped by the payments from the government, it is treated as if it's a loan to the government.
Final question from Lambert Brown. All right, Abco. Afterwards, we're going to close, and we will stay if you have a question, but we're going to close the formal press briefing.
Thank you. Question to the Information Minister. When will the media have the pleasure of the company of Prime Minister Sim similar to forums such as this to ask questions?
We can recommend to the Prime Minister and her team, and we will let you know.
Okay, the Press Association of Jamaica has described the fact that the Prime Minister has not really granted full-scale interview of significance to the media since she came to office in 2011 as disgraceful. You basically are the government's chief spokesperson. What say you to that from the PAJ?
Well, the Prime Minister speaks to members of the media from time to time. I think it's all a matter of perception. We try to make the Prime Minister available, and we will continue to do so. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We want to thank the media for coming. And if you have, Minister, I don't know if you will stay. If they he will stay for a few minutes. If you have additional questions that you want to ask, exclusives. And we want to thank you, and we want to wish everyone a good week. Thank you so much.
Watching PBC Jamaica.
Their smiles are magnetic, their love will draw you in, and their faith will inspire you. The residents at the Mustard Seed Communities will move your souls. With its caring staff and dedicated founder, the charitable home is changing lives every day. So tune in to Giving Hearts each Sunday starting November 1, 2015 at 6 p.m. as we unfold the dynamic story of the Mustard Seed Communities right here on PBC Jamaica, the People's Station.
This is the news on PBCJ. I'm Simone Absalom. Opposition members of Parliament walked out of the House of Representatives on Tuesday. This after government refused to give a commitment not to proceed with the proposed new prison transfer deal with the UK government.
Mr. Speaker, the truth of the matter is that building a modern maximum security prison for this administration is first and foremost an issue of human rights for our inmates right here in Jamaica.
Tensions reached a head when National Security Minister Peter Bunting refused the request from Leader of Opposition Andrew Holness.
Have you signed it? Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious matter. I just want to be clear. Now, the minister said he has. Mr. Speaker, the minister said that he has not signed an agreement. So I want to know, have you signed any other document that would form the basis of an agreement?
Mr. Speaker, I think the Leader of the Opposition is being delusional. He obviously believes that for the brief period for which he was Prime Minister, he can still continue to give those types of instructions to Cabinet Ministers. He is not in that position anymore, and I am not taking any instructions from him, and that's fine.
The Ministry of Education is advising non-teaching staff in primary schools that they will receive the first of a two-part payment of retroactive monies owed to them next week Friday. A release from the ministry said they will receive 50% of the 3 one-off payments due to them under a previous wage agreement between government and public sector employees. The ministry, while apologizing for the delay, said the balance of the outstanding amount will be paid to these workers in primary schools in December 2015. There are no reported cases of Zika V in Jamaica. That's the defense of Health Minister Dr. Fenton Ferguson. His pronouncement came during an address to Parliament on Tuesday, and in response to utterances in other circles that the illness is now in the island. The minister said that to report contrary to the facts is tantamount to public mischief.
I'm very concerned about the irresponsible utterances that have come from certain segments of the society. Mr. Speaker, this can only serve to hurt our country and all